So this is our second session of our last lecture. Let me share my screen. So last time, in the last hour, I showed you some age earning profile for Venezuela, right? So this is now for United States. This is a paper by Robert Lucas. The paper is titled Ideas and Growth, okay, published in 2009, I guess. So the black dots here are data, okay? And the lines, you know, these curves are coming from a model, okay? A model where there's schooling in it, right? So now you see different schooling levels, okay? So this is for people that go to school at 5 to 8 years, okay? The lower one. The middle one are for people who are high school graduates, okay? And this is for the people, the top one is for the people who are college graduates, okay? I mean, when I say college, of course, what I mean is university, you know that. Now, as you see, the model is successful until around age 50, right? For less than high school, the bottom education category here, it is also successful for higher ages, but it does not account for, the model cannot account for the difference, the decrease in the earning profile of high school graduates and college graduates. Okay, so of course, no model is of course perfect model, right? In those parts, until the age of 50, the model is very successful. And this model, of course, features, if you are interested enough, go check the paper. In this model, there's a human capital production technology. So basically, people's productivity are affected by the average productivity and the maximum productivity in the society they live in. So people learn from each other, and then they also go to school. And if they go to school, of course, they increase their earning potential. Okay, so this is how it looks in the data for a developed economy, and we have a relatively, I mean, moderately successful model to account for these age earning profiles. There are other and better models, by the way. So this is just one typical model. So let me go back to my slides now, and let's talk about urbanization. Okay, in almost everywhere in the world, we observe that economic development occurs along with urbanization. All right, so when countries start growing and you know, their real income per capita increasing, so we also observe urbanization. Now, of course, this is a chicken and egg problem, right? Because there are some reasons that create that create higher urbanization rates, but also in urban sites, there are things that increases your economic growth rate. Okay, so for instance, I mean, one thing that is typical, of course, is rural to urban migration, right? So urbanization rates increase because people are going to be transferred from, they migrate from rural areas to urban areas. Why would they do that? Well, there are typically two factors. One is that there is a push factor, okay? So productivity changes typically in agriculture, and diminishing margin returns with respect to labor in agriculture, that those things push labor out of agriculture, as you know. And there's also the pull factor, okay? So higher wages, and again, productivity changes in the modern sector or the urban areas, so they pull labor from the rural areas to urban areas, right? So this is just one thing. But then we also see the counter effect, all right? So, and that's typically because urban agglomeration, all right? So when when higher educated, more skillful, more healthier agents get together, when higher productivity firms get together, when they agglomerate in urban areas, they create positive externalities for each other. Okay, because of these positive externalities, economic growth could be faster. All right. So there's usually this positive effect of urban agglomeration on economic growth. All right. So of course this is hypothetical, but there are studies, several studies that confirm such a result. All right. On the other hand, if you cannot create enough jobs for these people in urban centers, in cities, then this creates youth unemployment. All right. So let me share some figures from another paper by Lucas again. So this is only the model results. There's no data in this figure, all right? And this is the share of farm employment, okay? The share of the fraction of labor force that is working in agriculture, basically, all right? And on the horizontal axis, you see years, all right? So there is a very long run transition here. And what is that theta? Well, theta is the parameter that is affecting that urban agglomeration, all right? Because when people come to urban areas, they benefit from the skills and human capital of other people, all right? So there is that externality parameter. And that, of course, that externality parameter affects the people working in agriculture, because when people go to urban cities, when people migrate from rural to urban areas, only this time, only if they migrate to urban areas, they benefit from this externality, right? So if that externality is large, for instance, theta is 0.9 for this figure, if that externality is large, of course, at any time, let's say, look at year 30, the share of people working in agriculture is smaller, right? Because that large externality parameter attracts more people. That urban agglomeration effect, since it is stronger, it attracts more people, and the pull factor is stronger, so that more people migrate to the urban areas. If that effect is not very strong, if theta is 0.3, so at year 30, for instance, you see that the share of labor force working in agriculture is larger than 1/3. Okay, here it is less than 1/3, right? So this is just, again, another model, just that is very typical, except this externality parameter. So this is Lucas' life earnings and rural urban migration paper, and that one was the ideas and growth paper. I can basically send the links to this paper, by the way, so you don't have to worry about that. But these are largely technical papers, but you can still get the main logic if you read the introduction of these papers. You get the main logic, and it's basically about urban agglomeration. Okay. Now this is data for a large number of countries. Okay. And you see two different dates for each country in the sample. The black dot is the level at 1970, and the diamond here is 1995 data. On the horizontal axis, you see GDP per capita, all right? And on the vertical axis, you see the share of urban population. So of course, there is a positive relationship, right? Positive relationship between real income per capita and urbanization rate. But that relationship is there are some countries, I don't know which ones are these, but there are some countries where in time, urbanization rates also decrease, right? So these are not typical. So the typical story is that urbanization rates increase. Now, in some countries, look at this country. This country is highly urbanized. This can be Singapore, I don't know. So this country is highly urbanized. So there is almost no change in the rate of urbanization, but there's fast growth, right? In this 25 years, there's fast growth in GDP per capita. There are some countries, I mean, look at this. There's little growth, but there's still some urbanization increase. Let's find another one. So there's one country here. I think that one is there. So you see, there's very large increase in both income and urbanization rate. Okay, and that is also very similar if you compare the slope here with this country, right? So the slope is around, I don't know, I mean, what's the degree here? 25 degrees or something like that. Okay, so there's a positive relationship, and this is across time. And now you see the regional differences. Okay, you see North America in the very beginning. So here the beginning is 1950. It's already highly urbanized. I mean, at least more than half of the people living in urban areas, and that increases steadily. In Oceania, we see a kind of a stable pattern after 70s, all right, because these are, there are small countries there as well. So this is a plain average, I suppose. So in Europe, there's that steady increase as well, but then in 80s there is some slowing down. If you look at Africa and Asia, all right, in 1950. Oh, by the way, this is some part of it is prediction, by the way, projection. All right, so look at here. So I think this data is again ending at 2005. So the rest of it, so almost half of the figure on the right, it's just prediction. But if you look at Africa and Asia, they're around 15% at 1950. All right, and there's pretty linear monotonic increase in those regions. Well, that's also because, especially in the case of Asia, there is certain fast-growing countries there, and certainly in Africa as well. All right. So again, it would be an interesting check if you look at this figure and update this with real data now, right? Because we have data for this episode and compare how that prediction or projection actually, whether it was successful or not. And as I said before, urbanization may also be related with high youth unemployment rates. This is what you see in the data. So in the world, we see around 12% or 13% youth unemployment rate. In developed regions, it's slightly larger. Developed regions are, again, more urbanized, so that's a hint, right? Youth unemployment is very large at North Africa, all right? Then we have Western Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, former Soviet Union, Southeastern Asia, and that goes on, right? So as you see, there's no particular geographical pattern. We see Northern Africa. Northern Africa is usually middle-income countries, right? I mean, Algeria, Morocco, Libya. I mean, lower middle income, let me say. So they had the largest. And if you look at this, in developed regions, it is in between, right? So there is no monotonic pattern if you compare the income levels or the stage of development. Centrally related with rural-urban migration is, of course, what happens in agriculture, all right? And more generally, we are concerned with the agricultural system and how developed your agricultural system is, because it is about food and nutrition. And why we do care about food and nutrition? Because it is among the development targets. It's about the, I mean, if you want to achieve successful development in a modern sense, we want to feed people with enough proteins, enough carbohydrates, and other stuff, all right, vitamins and etc. So one thing that is, again, that is very, very typical is that the share of agriculture in GDP and the share of agriculture in labor decrease with economic development. Okay, once again, there is this, complicated causality mechanisms. All right, so there's again a push factor, all right, and the pull factor. All right, that's pretty similar what happens with urbanization, because typically agriculture is done in rural areas, and industry and services are located in urban areas, right? Um, Now the decrease is not same. The speed of decrease or the pace of decrease is not the same across countries. All right, some countries are realizing that faster. Some countries are realizing that in a slower manner. And that is also related with, of course, agriculture productivity, right? Because some countries are endowed with better soil, involved with a endowed with a larger amount of arable land. They have better water systems, and they have better resources for irrigation, etc. Okay, so typically we look at, of course, the land endowment of the economy, the rainfall patterns, but all of these eventually must be measured in some way, right? So typically we look at cereal yields or crop yields. All right, so per per a given unit of land, what is your production level? All right, so that's cereal yield or crop yield, and that also differs. Okay. Now what you see here is again the share of labor and GDP in agriculture on the vertical axis, and GDP per capita again on a real basis on the horizontal axis. All right. And what you see here is, so the blue points are blue marks are for labor share, and black ones are for GDP share. Okay. We also look at particular patterns here, some trajectories for certain countries. Look at China. China is here, right? Starting at 1961 and ending at 2003. So there's fast growth, okay, in China. There's fast growth in China in terms of GDP per capita in this 40 years, but relatively little decrease in terms of labor share. Okay. Now look at Brazil for the same episode. Brazil does not record such an increase, because Brazil is already richer in 1961, so that's expected. But there is huge decrease in the share of labor force working in agriculture. And of course, Brazil is a very special case, because they're very successful in terms of food systems. All right, especially in the last 20-30 years, they basically solved their nutrition problems. Okay. We also have another example, so let's try to understand which country is this. I think it is Nigeria. Okay, so almost no growth, but still a large decrease. Okay, as you see, there is almost no growth, but a large decrease in share of labor force working in agriculture. Okay, so in one figure we see both the cross-section data, so there's a negative relationship, right? This is expected, as I discussed. And then we also see various patterns: very high growth with with very little decrease, milder growth with very large decrease, and almost no growth in real terms in Nigeria, but pretty fast decrease in the labor share. And these are the cereal yields, okay? Here we measure it by tons per hectare, okay? So the most troublesome is for, of course, sub-Saharan Africa. Their soil quality is not good. Their rainfall pattern is not good. They cannot grow certain crops, etc. Okay, or certain cereals. The situation is best for the developed countries, and then comes Asian developing countries, and then Latin America and Caribbean. Okay, so these are the countries, these are the regions when we look at the cereal yield. So you see, specifically you see increase in developed countries, Asian developing countries, and Latin America and the Caribbean, right? But you see almost no, so there's a very little increase in sub-Saharan Africa, but not a large increase, right? So why is that? Well, obviously, yields are not just about geography. It's not just about soil quality, right? Agricultural modernization also enters picture here. Okay, so in these countries, there's of course a level difference in the beginning, but since 1960, we also understand that even with changing geography or changing rainfall patterns, global warming, as all of these things, infused together, we can still see a secular increasing trend in these three regions, but no secular increasing trend in sub-Saharan Africa. So this suggests that these three regions modernize their agriculture so that they become more productive in terms of cereal yield, but in sub-Saharan Africa, it's not the case. Now we have another figure, so that's also very interesting. So I particularly chose that one. So in this figure, you see agriculture's contribution to growth on the vertical axis. So what do I mean? What do we mean by that? Well, you see some growth, right? So imagine that you are measuring GDP with the output approach. Of course, that's coming from different sectors. For each sector, you see a growth rate already, right? So then you, of course, take the weighted average for the overall growth rate. Now, on the vertical axis, we see the agriculture's percentage contribution to growth, right? So what fraction of, what is the growth rate in agriculture that translates into aggregate growth, all right? And here, you see the rural poor as a share of total poor. So if this number is close to 1, we see that most of the poor people in that country are living in rural areas. If this number is low, most of the poor people are living in urban areas, okay? So what do we see here? Well, these are denoted as agriculture-based countries. Why? Because agriculture's contribution to growth is high, and most of the poor people are living in agriculture. So, for instance, India is here, Malawi is here, Niger is here, Sudan is here, Togo is here, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, Paraguay, Comoros, Syria, Madagascar, Chad, Laos, Rwanda, Burundi, like these are so Mozambique, Kenya, Guinea, Mali. So these are the countries that are agriculture based, and the share of rural poor is very large. I mean, larger than 50%. Okay. Then we have these urbanized countries. Look at these countries. So we have Venezuela, Chile, Bulgaria, Colombia, Czechia, Russian Federation, Ukraine, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, El Salvador, Poland, Hungary, Turkey, Peru, Bolivia, Philippines, Dominican Republic, Slovakia, South Africa, Malaysia. So these countries are urbanized. So most of the poor people are not living in rural areas in those countries. So these are urbanized. And then there are the countries that are transforming. So what are these countries? So what is specific about these countries? Where agriculture, the contribution of agriculture is lower for these countries. What does this mean? Manufacturing and industries are relatively growing faster, right? Faster than agriculture. So we can infer this from this figure, because the share of agriculture in terms of the contribution to growth is smaller. But in the meantime, most of the poor people are living in these countries, in rural areas. All right. So these countries, what do we expect? Well, since now they are getting modernized, they are increasing the growth contribution of manufacturing and services. They're gonna be realizing, they're gonna be realizing rural to urban migration, the share of decrease in agriculture, because the pull factor will be stronger in the next 10 years, for instance, that these countries will be located in 10 or 20 or 30 years. These countries will be located here because their manufacturing and services growth must be faster. The growth must be originating mainly from manufacturing and services, because the contribution of agriculture is smaller, right? So we see China here, Bangladesh, Indonesia, of course, India, for instance, is starting here at 1965 and entering here at 1994. A similar pattern is true for Indonesia. Look at Indonesia. Indonesia is a largely agricultural economy. It is still an agricultural economy, but it is transforming fast. Okay, we have Thailand, Tunisia, Romania is on the edge. Morocco here, Algeria, Guatemala, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Yemen is on the edge here. Okay, and Zimbabwe is here. Okay. So finally, let's talk about gender inequalities. All right. So everywhere so this is this is kind of an interesting thing. So you look at everywhere, and regardless of the development patterns, you see gender inequalities. Of course, in the developed countries, it is milder. In underdeveloped or developing countries, the situation is far more worse for women. First thing, we have gender gap in education. Okay, school access and completion rates are typically larger for men. Then there's a gender gap in health. All right, ill boys taken to hospital more frequently than ill girls. That's very, very interesting, especially in Africa. We see such stuff. I have, field experiment. I actually talked with people in Ivory Coast in villages. So that was a humanitarian aid agency. So the guy, the expert here, described that people in certain villages, when their girl is sick, they don't care about it. Okay. In terms of reproductive rights, that's also a huge issue. The typical and very sad example is female genital mutilation, right? One thing that is, of course, typical is that women predominantly work in agriculture in developing countries, right? So those are the countries that are still largely agricultural, and they work typically in agriculture. There are certain reasons for that we can discuss. The result of all these is that men earn more for the same job. Okay, same amount of work, and firms pay more, firms pay the men more. All right. So this is called gender wage gap or gender earnings gap. All right. So there's a difference between the average salary of a male worker relative to average salary of a female worker. And there are also other patterns. One interesting pattern is this. When you look at top positions, top managerial positions, you see lots of men, all right? But you see fewer women. When you look at executive committees of firms, organizations, associations, you see again in managerial or directorial positions, fewer women and more men. There is also this thing called child penalty. There's a very good study, I think, for Denmark. I'm not sure, some country in Scandinavia, but I think it's Denmark. So they have the full data set for people, all right? So for some cohorts, of course, not for all generations, but for some cohorts, they record the entire earning history of people, okay? And they know when they get child, when they have a kid, all right? And then they look at the changes in the earnings of mothers and fathers, all right? And that is striking. If I find it, I will post the paper. So after having a child, mother's wage permanently decrease, all right? Mother's earning profile permanently decrease, but there's no change in the father's wage. And this is from a large sample, and this is a universal sample, right? So it is all people living in Denmark, all right? So that's a huge finding. So why is that gender inequality even in Denmark? We have to be concerned about this. All right, that's a very interesting topic in labor economics and in development economics. Okay, and there is a very nice chapter, of course, on gender or section in your textbook, so you can read it. You can read from other resources as well. That's all from me. So now we can discuss in this. So we have only very little time left. So let's take a break because I want to talk about randomized control trials and micro approaches to modern approaches, modern microeconomic approaches to development. So let's take another break now. It is now 10:35 almost. Let's meet at 10:50. Okay. At 10:50, we're gonna continue. All right, we're gonna have a discussion session and your questions. Let's meet at 10:50. Okay. Bye bye.